At that time, my wife, Donna Shoemaker, was asked to come to Dodge, Maine, because they wanted people to leaflet white workers about this campaign. But they wanted white people to do that, not to have, so to show that Drum had its concerns, but the white workers also had their concerns. And there was a group of white workers called CREW, Committee for a Real Union Now. And that was headed by actually a Mexican American guy named Rivas. And so Rivas and his group were going to be leafleting in support of this election that was going to go on. And the election was for somebody called trustee. Now, trustees are sort of like boards of directors of unions. They're not really union presidents. They don't have, but they're responsible for the finances of the union, et cetera. And for a local like Local 3, which maybe had 7,000 to 10,000 members then, it was a big local. So this, to be a trustee of this local was important because you controlled the monies. And there was always the belief that Local 3, which was in Hamtramck, was really controlled or somehow in alliance with the Hamtramck Police Department and the city of Hamtramck. And when the wildcat occurred in June, there were a number of black workers arrested by the police. And the belief was that the union was giving names to the police and certain people were arrested, etc. So the election itself was important because if a Representative Drum became a trustee of the union, then the union would be less likely to make these ties, etc. Now, none of this, who knew whether this was all true or not, but at least that was the strong belief of people at the time. And the guy who was selected to run, Ron March, was not a black nationalist or a militant. He was a very, very kind of college-educated black guy who was upwardly mobile and who really was articulate, was the kind of person who should be a union leader. I mean, who would have emerged anyway, probably, except that he wasn't white. And he had been in the plant for 10 years. He was a high-low driver. He wasn't in the hardest job in the plant. He had worked his way out of that. He was well-liked by lots and lots of white workers. So they put him forward, and I think it was strategically a very interesting. So you had a situation where you had a candidate who was far better on every qualification, education, experience, etc. And of course the union slate put up a candidate. And you had significant demands that occurred out of the wildcat. And then third, and I think this is the part that Drum and that was most impressive to me, they didn't want to just appeal to black people. They wanted to appeal to white workers. So you had this group called CREW, which they helped organize, but CREW, so those white people who came down there and leafleted, and Donna was one of them, and I showed up one, were all part of CREW, and they went to hand leaflets to white people. Historically, when Drum, footnote, Drum used to put out a weekly mimeograph, which, in retrospect, in today's world of high technology media stuff was very primitive, but every week they would put out this newspaper, and it would only give it to black workers, and that was a little bit of irritation. White workers said, well, I want to read this, but they would never give it to them. So the idea of CREW being established meant that white workers would get materials as well from white people. They were the 3 or 4 younger workers, and interesting enough, a few older Polish women, and also a couple of students from Macomb. So it was this very, and of course, at that time, you had the younger students all with long hair and beard, and they were only there to work as little as possible. They were basically supporters because it seemed like a cool thing to do because they had all these people on the other side of the street with drums and the nationalist flag and stuff like that. I mean, they were less conscious of that. But then you also had Polish women who were very, very conscious of discrimination. And what was very interesting, later on, 3 years after that, one of the Polish women who supported Drum, her son got arrested in East Detroit. She lived in East Detroit, and we wound up doing a whole thing around the police, and her connection was because she, with us, was because of the Drum and activities, etc. Her name was Sophie Francis, a very interesting woman.